If we love one another, God remains in us, and His love is brought to perfection in us.
Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Mark. The Pharisees approached Jesus and asked, "Is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife?" They were testing him. He said to them in reply, "What did Moses command you?" They replied, "Moses permitted a husband to write a bill of divorce and dismiss her." But Jesus told them, "Because of the hardness of your hearts, He wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate." In the house, the disciples again questioned Jesus about this. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. I don't know how much space I have for this. Thinking about the fact that today is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi and St. Ignatius of Loyola, I have a good story for you. So it says that one day a Jesuit and a Franciscan were having this argument about which was the best religious order. And the Jesuits were saying, "We're the best religious order. We have all the schools, we have all the universities, we have, the best. We have this awesome school in Miami called Belen. We're the best order. Been around for 500 years. The Franciscan says, "We're the best order. We've been around much longer than you guys have. We have a very good university up in Steubenville. The fact is that St. Francis is loved by so many people because we have now even an encyclical written by Pope Francis about the environment. We're the best religious order." And as they were fighting back and forth, all of a sudden an angel comes down from heaven and deposits a beautiful golden letter on the table and then disappears. And they opened up the envelope and there was a little note on the inside that said, my dear children, I love you both the same." And it was signed God S.J. Right? Efraín, dime que eso es verdad, ¿no verdad? Okay. So I want to tell you an interesting story. This is something that happened to me several years ago, and it happened while I was teaching at the school at Belén. We had invited a speaker. You heard of this organization called Dale Carnegie, right? So they go around the world and they give speeches, and a lot of the things that they talk about are about leadership, and that's one of their main focus based on the book that was written by Dale Carnegie himself. So we invited a speaker to come to Belen to speak to the high school boys, 9th to 12th grade. So we filled the Belen Theater with about 750 young men, and this gentleman went up to speak to them about what it is to be a leader in the modern world. That was the topic. And so he began to speak to them about all these different qualities, and at one point, standing up there on the stage, he paused and he looked out into the sea of young faces and he asks the boys a question. And this was the question. He says, "Gentlemen, if you were to find out right now that in half an hour you would be dead, 30 minutes, you'll die, and you can only speak to one person, who would that person be? There was silence in that theater. You could hear a pin drop, which is amazing for young boys, right? Silence. And I too, I was in the back thinking to myself, oh my God, who would I call if I had only half an hour? And then he followed up with a second question. He says, what would you tell that person when you spoke to them? And then there was silence again. Then he got off stage and he pointed out randomly to one of the boys. And he says, please stand up. You don't have to stand. Stay right there. And the young man stood up. What is your name? The young man says, my name is Richard. He says, very good, Richard. Who would you call? Who would you speak to? And Richard says, well, I'd probably call my mother. He says, very good, your mother. And what would you tell your mother, Richard? And Richard says, well, I was thinking about that, and I think I would tell her how much I love her and how grateful I am for everything she's ever done for me in my life. The guy said, that's excellent, Richard. And he walked over to where Richard was, and he grabbed Richard by the hand, and he walked him up onto the stage in front of 750 people. 749 people, right? And then this guy pulls out his cell phone, and he says, Richard, give me your mother's cell phone number. And in typical style of a teenage boy who's very nervous, he goes, oh, why? He says, why? Because we're going to call your mother right now. And so he began to give the number, 786-295 dialing. And he gives the phone to Richard. Let me tell you, just imagine this. Complete silence in that theater. My heart is pumping in the back. I could hear the phone ringing. I could hear it. I could just imagine that phone ringing and ringing. And finally Richard on the phone says, like a good Cuban boy, Mommy. Mommy es rica. No, Mommy. Tranquilízate. And he says, Mommy, I just called to tell you I love you very much. And thank you for everything you've ever done for me. And then he hung up the phone. That's not her, right?
One more.
As you can imagine, that mother must have been going crazy on the other line. ¿Por qué me está llamando este muchacho en mediodía trayéndome eso desde el colegio? Richard sat down, and the speaker went on to say this. Why is it that we wait for incredible moments in our lives to tell people that we love them? He says, you know what one of the greatest characteristics of a leader is today? He is able to identify the important people in their lives, and he tells them all the time, I love you. You don't have to wait for a birthday. You don't have to wait for an anniversary. You don't have to wait at the moment of death to be able to tell these people, I love you. You don't have to do that. So I thought this was beautiful. Amazing experience. And you listen to the story and you say to yourself, that was a great story. But let me tell you, it gets even better. Because see, I knew something about Richard that the guy who was presenting had no idea about. Because he didn't know who Richard was. But I know something about Richard that he didn't know. You see, 2 weeks before this presentation, 2 weeks before this guy from Dale Carnegie had come to speak to the kids, Richard's father died of a massive heart attack. 42 years old. All of a sudden he dies. And I remember that when I went to the wake to pay my respects to Richard and to his mother, I remember how Richard came up to where I was and he gave me a hug and he said to me, right here in this ear, he said, Father, the only thing I regret is that I didn't tell my father how much I loved him. Now, here's the deal. I've been a Catholic for 45 years. You know how old I am, Efrain? I'm 45 years old. I've been a Catholic my whole life. And I have to tell you that as a man of faith for 45 years, A man of faith, not because my parents raised me. I'm not a Catholic by culture, I'm a Catholic by conviction. As a man of faith and a very strong conviction, I know for a fact that what I had just witnessed with Richard was an experience of God's perfect and unconditional love for him. It was God saying, Richard, you didn't have an opportunity to tell your father you loved him. But I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell your mother in the presence of 749 other people to tell her how much you love her. It was an experience of God's perfect, unconditional love. Let me tell you something. I know for a fact that every single person who is sitting here today has also had experiences of God's perfect and unconditional love. And I'm going to tell you something else. There are some of you in particular who have experienced it in an extraordinary way. And I'm going to tell you why right now. You know that the church, very wisely, understanding the scriptures, the church says something that we have to pay a lot of attention to. Our Catholic Church says to us, if you really want to understand better perfect unconditional love, which is God's love for us, do you want to understand perfect unconditional love? The church says, make a comparison. It's not like the love between a mother and her son. It's not like the love between a father and his daughter. No. You want to understand perfect unconditional love? It's like the love between a husband and his wife. Between a wife